Welcome to the Battleground Chronicles World War II channel. Subscribe to our channel because every day we publish stories about the valor of American soldiers based on real events. Support us. Like our videos if you like what we do for you. June 20th, 1944. The ragged breaths of exhausted men hang in the damp morning air. Private First Class James Satterfield of the 116th Infantry Regiment, 29th Infantry Division, peers through a gap in the ancient Norman hedgerow. His uniform is caked with mud, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. Just 14 days earlier, he had been part of the first wave at Omaha Beach. The water had turned red that day. So many friends lost in minutes. But what waits ahead may be even worse. Before him stretches a patchwork quilt of small fields enclosed by massive earthen berms, topped with centuries-old trees and tangled vegetation. Each field is a potential fortress. Each hedgerow potentially conceals German machine guns, mortars, snipers, or worse. The French locals call this landscape bocage. The Americans will soon call it hell. They don't tell you about this in training, whispers Corporal Thomas Miller beside him, his voice barely audible. Each field is its own battlefield. They can see us, but we can't see them. As dawn breaks over the Norman countryside, the shadows cast by the hedgerows grow longer, more ominous. A fine mist rises from the ground, ghost-like tendrils reaching upward. The advance toward St. Lo is about to continue. Intelligence reports indicate the 29th Division will face elements of the elite German 3rd Fallschirmjäger Parachute Division, battle-hardened veterans of the Eastern Front, now dug in among these impenetrable green walls. Major General Charles Gerhardt, commanding the 29th Division, had told his men what was expected. 29, let's go. But in the bocage, going means paying for every yard with blood. No one yet realizes that the division will soon be suffering casualties at the rate of 1,000 men per day, the equivalent of an entire regiment lost each week. Satterfield crosses himself quickly, a habit from his Catholic upbringing. The whistle will blow soon. Men will die today. Some will die quickly from machine gun fire. Others will bleed out slowly in the mud, calling for mothers who cannot hear them. The lush green landscape of Normandy is about to become a slaughterhouse, and the 29th Division will be fed into its grinder field by bloody field. The true horror of war isn't found in fantasy or imagination. It lives in the documented facts, the verified casualties, the confirmed experiences of those who endured it. This is the story of the 29th Infantry Division during the hedgerow battles of Normandy, a horror story written entirely in truth. July 7, 1944. The formal offensive towards St. Lo has begun. The 29th Infantry Division forms part of Major General Charles Corlett's 19th Corps, alongside the 30th and 35th Infantry Divisions. Their objective? Capture the strategic crossroads town of St. Lo, which will serve as the launching point for Operation Cobra, the major breakout from the Normandy beachhead. Captain Charles Cawthon, 2nd Battalion Executive Officer of the 116th Infantry Regiment, stands with a small group of officers studying their maps in the early morning light. The terrain before them is unlike anything they trained for back in England. Each Norman field is surrounded by earthen banks between 3 and 15 feet high, topped with tangled hedges and trees that have grown together for centuries. These hedgerows date to Roman times, explains Lieutenant Colonel Phillips, pointing to the map. The locals call them bocage. Each one is like a natural fortress wall. Germans have fortified them with machine gun nests at the corners. They've had 4 years to prepare these positions. The men look out at the seemingly peaceful countryside. Cawthon notices how the morning mist clings to the vegetation, how the hedgerows create complex shadows even in broad daylight. The beauty of the landscape stands in stark contrast to its deadly purpose. At 0600 hours, American artillery opens fire on German positions. The earth shakes as shells explode among the hedgerows. For 1 hour, the bombardment continues. 20,000 rounds of artillery rain down on German positions. The smell of cordite fills the air, mixing with the earthy scent of disturbed soil and burning vegetation. When the barrage lifts, The order comes to advance. Cawthon watches as the men of the 116th move toward the first hedgerow. Suddenly, the peaceful morning erupts in violence. German machine guns open fire from concealed positions. Men fall, screaming. Others dive for cover in drainage ditches. "They're dug into the corners," someone shouts. "They've got enfilade fire on the whole field," Cawthon would later record in his official report. A pall of smoke was over the fields, holding in it the sweet, sickening stench of high explosives, which we had come to associate with death. The advance stalls. By midday, what should have been a push of several miles has gained only a few hundred yards. Company F of the 116th is nearly wiped out in a single German counterattack. The few survivors report that the Germans seem to know exactly where and when they would attack. As night falls on July 7, the men of the 29th Division dig in wherever they can find cover. The casualties for this first day of the St. Lo offensive are tallied: 376 men killed, wounded, or missing. It is only the beginning. July 8, 1944. Dawn breaks over the hedgerows. The men of the 116th Infantry Regiment wake to the sound of German mortars zeroing in on their positions. The previous day's advance, purchased with so much blood, has carried them forward only 400 yards through the maze of hedgerows. Private John Robertson of F Company, one of the few survivors of yesterday's failed attack, huddles in a shallow foxhole. His squad had been caught in the open by German machine guns. "My squad, as far as I remember, was really butchered up," he later testified in an official Army interview. "Some of us were blown forward, some backward. It was a big mess. When I regained my senses, I got up and started limping back. As I was slopping along, thinking about why my shoe was full of water, I felt my leg and my hand went all the way to the bone." Robertson had been evacuated to a field hospital, his wound cleaned and bandaged, and sent back to the line the same day. The 29th Division couldn't afford to lose any more men. Major General Charles Gerhardt, commanding the 29th Division, arrives at the forward command post shortly after 0800 hours. The situation maps show minimal progress. Intelligence reports confirm they are facing elements of the elite German 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division, paratroopers who are experts in defense and camouflage. "We need a new approach," Gerhardt says, studying the map. "These hedgerow-to-hedgerow attacks are bleeding us dry." A junior officer suggests trying to flank the German positions, but reconnaissance reports show that each field is defended in depth, with multiple interlocking fields of fire. "The Germans have had years to prepare these positions," explains Colonel Canham of the 116th. "Each hedgerow is a fortress, and they've got firing positions covering every gap and lane." By mid-morning, a new attack plan is formulated. Artillery will target the corners of the fields, where German machine guns are typically positioned. Then tanks will advance alongside infantry, providing covering fire. The attack jumps off at 1100 hours. Initially, progress is made as the combined arms approach allows several hedgerows to be cleared, but then disaster strikes. As Sherman tanks attempt to climb over the massive earthen berms, their underbellies are exposed. German anti-tank teams, armed with Panzerfausts, knock out 5 tanks in quick succession. The burning vehicles, with crews trapped inside, send columns of thick black smoke into the sky. The smell of burning fuel and flesh spreads across the battlefield. Men vomit from the stench and the horror of hearing their comrades scream as they burn alive inside the metal coffins of their tanks. By sunset, the 116th Regiment has advanced another 600 yards at the cost of 412 casualties. At headquarters, officers calculate that at this rate, the entire division will be combat ineffective before they reach St. Lo. The night brings little rest. German artillery fires harassing rounds throughout the darkness. Periodically, flares illuminate the battlefield, revealing the grotesque silhouettes of destroyed tanks and the unrecovered bodies of the dead caught on barbed wire or slumped over hedgerows. In field hospitals behind the lines, doctors work through the night, operating by lamplight as the wounded continue to arrive. Amputations are common. The combination of artillery shrapnel and vegetation fragments creates devastating wounds that quickly become infected in the damp conditions. This is the second day of what will become known as the Battle of the Hedgerows. 13 more days of this horror await the men of the 29th Division. July 9, 1944. The sound of metal on metal echoes across the assembly area as maintenance crews work frantically on a new innovation. Sergeant Curtis G. Coolin of the 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron has designed a solution to the hedgerow problem. Steel prongs welded to the front of tanks that can punch through the earthen berms instead of climbing over them. These improvised devices, soon to be dubbed Rhino tanks, are fashioned from scrap metal salvaged from German beach obstacles. Watching the welding work, Lieutenant Colonel Philip Comunale of the 747th Tank Battalion shakes his head. "We're making this up as we go along," he remarks to a fellow officer. "Nothing in our training prepared us for fighting in this kind of terrain." While the tank modifications continue, the infantry resumes its grim advance. Today, the 115th Infantry Regiment takes the lead. Their objective is the high ground near the village of La Luzerne, less than 2 miles from Saint-Lô. The morning fog has not yet burned off when the attack begins at 05:45 hours. Using lessons painfully learned over the previous 2 days, the infantry moves in small groups, hugging the bases of the hedgerows, avoiding the open fields where German machine guns have clear fields of fire. Staff Sergeant Frank Perigori leads his squad toward a German strongpoint. In an extraordinary act of courage, Perigori crawls forward alone, locates a German machine gun nest, and single-handedly kills or captures several German soldiers. His actions allow the company to advance and secure their objective. For this action, Perigori will be awarded the Medal of Honor, posthumously, as he will be killed in action just days later. By midday, the 115th has advanced nearly 800 yards, but at a terrible cost. German snipers, expertly concealed in the dense foliage of the hedgerows, take a steady toll. Medics, identified by their Red Cross armbands, are particularly targeted, making evacuation of the wounded even more difficult. Private William Henderson describes the scene in a letter home that would later be published in his hometown newspaper. "The fields are beautiful with wildflowers, but the ditches are filled with blood. Men who were laughing and joking yesterday are being zipped into mattress covers today. The chaplains can't keep up with the burials." As afternoon turns to evening, rain begins to fall. A steady, cold drizzle that turns the ground to mud and fills foxholes with water. The temperature drops, and men shiver in soaked uniforms. Trench foot, a painful condition caused by prolonged exposure to damp, cold conditions, begins to claim victims almost as efficiently as German bullets. Field hospitals report 508 casualties for the day, 301 wounded, 159 killed, and 48 missing. Among the wounded are 74 cases of combat fatigue, men whose minds have fractured under the constant stress and horror. Night falls, but there is little sleep for the exhausted men of the 29th Division. German mortars continue to fall at irregular intervals, deliberately timed to prevent rest. The psychological effects of this strategy are as devastating as the physical casualties it produces. In the darkness, men whisper prayers, write letters home by flashlight concealed under blankets, or simply stare into the void, wondering if they'll live to see another dawn. July 10, 1944. The assault on Martinville Ridge begins. This high ground, just 2 miles east of Saint-Lô, must be taken before the final push to the town can commence. Intelligence reports indicate that the ridge is heavily defended by elements of the 352nd Infantry Division and the newly arrived 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division. Captain Thomas Howie, commanding officer of 3rd Battalion, 116th Infantry, gathers his company commanders before dawn. The rain has finally stopped, but the ground remains sodden, making movement difficult. "This is it, gentlemen," Howie says quietly. "Division HQ believes if we take this ridge, Saint-Lô will fall. We move out in 30 minutes. The attack begins at 0600 hours, following another massive artillery barrage. The newly modified Rhino tanks lead the way, their welded steel prongs tearing gaps in the hedgerows. Infantry follows close behind, rushing through the breaches before German defenders can respond. Initially, The advance progresses well. 3 hedgerows are cleared in the first hour with relatively light casualties, but as the American forces push further up the ridge, resistance stiffens. German artillery, zeroed in on likely avenues of approach, begins falling with deadly accuracy. "They've got observers on the high ground," radios Lieutenant James Wilson from his forward position. "They can see everything we're doing." By mid-morning, the attack has stalled again. The German defenders, experts in the use of terrain, have established interlocking fields of fire that cover every approach route. German snipers, some tied into the trees to avoid detection, take a steady toll on American officers and NCOs. Captain Howie moves forward to assess the situation personally. As he crosses an open area between hedgerows, a German machine gun opens fire. Howie is hit multiple times but continues to direct his men until he loses consciousness. Medics evacuate him to an aid station, but his wounds are too severe. He dies that evening without regaining consciousness. The news of Howie's death spreads quickly through the ranks of the 116th. Known for his leadership and courage, Howie was respected and loved by his men. His death hits morale hard, especially as reports come in of similar losses throughout the division. By nightfall on July 10, the 29th Division has suffered another 562 casualties. The rifle companies, which normally number between 150 to 180 men, are down to 60-70 effectives each. Replacements arrive during the night, mostly green troops with minimal training who have never experienced combat. Many will become casualties within their first 24 hours at the front. In the command post, General Gerhardt studies the casualty reports with a grim expression. At the current rate, his division will cease to exist as an effective fighting force within a week. Yet the orders from 19th Corps headquarters are unequivocal. Continue the attack, secure Martinville Ridge, and prepare for the final assault on Saint-Lô. Outside, the night is alive with the sounds of war, the crack of rifle fire, the distinctive burp of German MG-42 machine guns, which American troops have nicknamed Hitler's buzzsaw for their 1,200 rounds per minute rate of fire, the thump of mortars, and the screams of the wounded. Flares periodically illuminate the grotesque landscape, casting harsh white light over fields littered with bodies and equipment. This is the 4th day of the battle. The worst is still to come. July 11, 1944. Dawn reveals a battlefield transformed by violence. The once green fields are now churned into mud by artillery and tank tracks. The hedgerows, still standing despite the punishment they've taken, are scarred and splintered. Some trees have been completely defoliated by shell fragments, standing as bare skeletal sentinels over the killing ground. The 116th Regiment, still reeling from the loss of Captain Howie, resumes its attack on Martinville Ridge at 05:15 hours. The men move forward methodically, having learned through bitter experience how to navigate this treacherous terrain. Small teams leapfrog from hedgerow to hedgerow, providing covering fire for one another. Private Robert Slaughter, a BAR, Browning automatic rifle, gunner with E Company, later described the experience in his war memoir. Each field was a separate battle. You never knew what waited on the other side of a hedgerow. Sometimes nothing, sometimes hell itself. The worst was when you'd break through and find yourself staring right at a German machine gun nest. Those seconds, when their eyes met yours and everyone froze for just a heartbeat. Those were the longest seconds of the war. By mid-morning, the regiment has secured several key positions on the ridge, but is again pinned down by heavy fire from concealed German positions. The modified Rhino tanks prove their worth, allowing armored support to accompany the infantry through the maze of hedgerows. But the Germans have adapted as well, placing mines in likely breach points and positioning anti-tank teams to ambush the Shermans as they emerge through the gaps. At 11:20 hours, a forward observer reports a large German force massing for a counterattack. Artillery is called in immediately, and for 15 minutes, the ridge is hammered by American shells. When the barrage lifts, the attack resumes, with the Americans pushing forward to secure the ground before the Germans can reorganize. A particularly fierce engagement occurs at a crossroads near the village of La Calvaire. Here, A German strongpoint centered around a stone farmhouse resists repeated attacks. The building has been fortified, its thick Norman walls able to withstand all but direct hits from heavy artillery. Machine guns positioned in the upper windows have clear fields of fire across several open fields. After 3 unsuccessful assaults result in heavy casualties, a self-propelled 155mm howitzer is brought forward. At point-blank range, it fires 3 rounds into the farmhouse, reducing it to rubble and killing or burying all defenders inside. The cost for the day is high. 623 American casualties, including 183 killed, 412 wounded, and 28 missing. German losses, while difficult to estimate precisely, are reported by intelligence officers to be comparable. Prisoners taken during the day's fighting appear exhausted and demoralized, though the elite Fallschirmjäger units continue to fight with fanatical determination. That evening, a somber ceremony takes place behind the lines. The body of Captain Thomas Howie is draped with an American flag. Colonel Charles Canham, commanding the 116th Infantry Regiment, addresses the assembled officers. "Gentlemen, there lies the first man of this division who will enter Saint-Lô. It is decided that when the city is finally taken, Howie's body will be carried into the town as a symbol of the sacrifice made by the men of the 29th Division." This decision, made in the emotional aftermath of a bloody day of fighting, will result in one of the most poignant images of the Normandy campaign. As night falls, the rain returns, a steady, cold downpour that turns foxholes into pools and makes the steep slopes of Martinville Ridge treacherously slippery. Men huddle under ponchos, trying to keep their weapons dry and fighting the bone-deep chill that seems permanent after days in the field. The battle continues. July 12th, 1944. Martinville Ridge is now largely in American hands, but the cost has been staggering. Rifle companies that landed at Normandy with 180 men are down to 40-50 effectives. Replacement soldiers arrive in small groups, but there aren't enough experienced officers and NCOs to properly integrate them into the units. The focus of the attack shifts to a new objective, Hill 122, another area of high ground that overlooks Saint-Lô from the north. This position is assigned to the 35th Infantry Division, which will attack in conjunction with the 29th Division's push from the east. The day begins with another artillery barrage, but German observers on Hill 122 call down counter-battery fire on American positions. Several artillery pieces are knocked out, and an ammunition truck explodes, causing a chain reaction that lights up the morning sky and causes numerous casualties. Captain William Puntenny, who has taken over command of Captain Howie's battalion, leads his men forward through a particularly dense section of hedgerows. The fighting is at extremely close range, sometimes less than 20 yards separating American and German positions. "You could hear them talking," Sergeant Michael Quinn later recalled. "Sometimes they'd call out in English, trying to get us to reveal our positions. One of them kept yelling, 'Hey Joe, where are you?' Nobody was fooled, but it was unnerving to know they were that close." The German defenders employ bocage tactics, perfected over weeks of fighting. Snipers positioned in trees, machine guns covering gaps in the hedgerows, mortars pre-registered on likely assembly areas, and well-camouflaged foxholes that remain silent until American troops have passed, allowing German soldiers to attack from behind. By noon, the temperature has risen significantly, creating a humid, oppressive atmosphere. The smell of decomposition begins to pervade areas where bodies have lain unrecovered for days. Flies swarm in black clouds, settling on the wounded, the dead, and the living alike. Medical personnel work to exhaustion in field hospitals, many having gone without proper sleep for days. Triage becomes increasingly difficult as the number of wounded outpaces the capacity to treat them. Decisions about who receives immediate attention and who must wait, decisions that often determine who lives and who dies, take a psychological toll on doctors and medics. A German counterattack at 15:30 hours temporarily recaptures a section of Martinville Ridge. The 2nd Battalion of the 116th Regiment, already under strength, suffers heavy casualties before artillery support can be brought to bear. A desperate situation is saved by the actions of Staff Sergeant Frank Perigori, who single-handedly attacks a German machine gun position, killing several defenders with his bayonet and capturing others. This action, which will contribute to his posthumous Medal of Honor, allows the battalion to stabilize its position and eventually repulse the counterattack. As evening approaches, a new problem emerges: ammunition shortages. The difficult terrain has hampered resupply efforts, and several units report critical shortages of small arms ammunition, grenades, and mortar rounds. Officers order conservation measures, instructing men to fire only when targets are clearly identified. The casualty count for the day stands at 594, 178 killed, 389 wounded, and 27 missing. The 29th Division has now lost over 2,100 men in just 6 days of fighting in the hedgerows. That night, as men dig new foxholes or improve existing ones, the sound of tank engines can be heard from the German lines. Intelligence reports suggest that elements of the 2nd Panzer Division are moving into position to reinforce the defense of St. Lo. The battle is about to intensify further. July 13, 1944. The 7th day of the battle dawns with fog shrouding the hedgerows, reducing visibility to less than 50 yards. The dampness seems to amplify sounds, creating an eerie acoustic environment where distant gunfire sounds unnervingly close, and the moans of wounded men carry further than they should. The attack resumes at 0630 hours, with the 115th and 116th Regiments advancing in parallel towards St. Lo. The 175th Regiment, which has been held in reserve, is committed to the battle to maintain momentum. Fresh troops move through the lines, passing exhausted men who have been fighting continuously for days. The fog provides both advantage and danger, concealing movement from German observers, but also increasing the risk of friendly fire incidents and making navigation through the maze of hedgerows even more challenging. Several units become disoriented and find themselves moving parallel to their objectives rather than toward them. At 0920 hours, the fog begins to lift and German resistance immediately stiffens. Machine gun fire erupts from concealed positions, pinning down advancing companies. German mortars, pre-registered on critical terrain features, begin dropping shells with deadly accuracy. The 747th Tank Battalion, supporting the infantry advance, loses 3 more Sherman tanks to concealed anti-tank guns. Despite the Rhino modifications allowing tanks to breach hedgerows more effectively, the armor remains vulnerable to German Panzerfausts and 88mm anti-tank guns hidden in the dense vegetation. Major Norman Coda, Assistant Division Commander of the 29th, moves forward to assess the situation personally. Known for his courage and leadership, he had been among the first senior officers ashore on Omaha Beach on D-Day. Coda's presence rallies the men. He organizes an assault on a particularly stubborn German strongpoint, personally directing artillery fire and coordinating the movement of infantry and tanks. The strongpoint falls, but the cost is high. By mid-afternoon, the combined regiments of the 29th Division have advanced only 800 yards closer to St. Lo. The city itself is now visible from forward positions, a shattered landscape of rubble and partially collapsed buildings. American artillery and air attacks have reduced much of St. Lo to ruins, but this has only made it easier to defend, creating a maze of debris that channelizes any attacking force. The hedgerows now contain a grim harvest, the bodies of fallen soldiers from both sides. Some have been lying in the July heat for days, creating a nauseating stench that permeates the battlefield. Burial details work when possible, but the constant fighting makes recovery of the dead a dangerous and often impossible task. Medical personnel report a disturbing increase in psychiatric casualties, men whose minds have broken under the relentless strain. The symptoms vary. Some become catatonic, unable to move or speak. Others shake uncontrollably. Some laugh hysterically or weep without stopping. Field hospitals have established special sections for these cases, but treatment options are limited, and many men are simply given sedatives and returned to duty when they appear functional. The day's casualty report shows no improvement. 612 men killed, wounded, or missing. Particularly concerning is the loss of junior officers and experienced NCOs, creating leadership vacuums in many companies. In some cases, privates who have been in combat for less than a week find themselves acting as squad leaders simply because no one with more experience remains. As darkness falls on July 13th, the men of the 29th Division dig in once more, creating what protection they can in a landscape that offers little security. German harassing fire continues throughout the night, a deliberate strategy to prevent rest and wear down morale. Periodically, illumination flares cast harsh white light over the battlefield, freezing men in place for fear of being spotted by snipers. The battle for St. Lo has become a war of attrition, with the 29th Division bleeding away its strength with each passing day. Yet the strategic importance of the objective means there can be no withdrawal, no pause in the assault. The horror continues. July 14, 1944. Bastille Day in France passes without celebration in the war-torn fields of Normandy. For the men of the 29th Division, it is simply the 8th day of an ordeal that shows no sign of ending. The morning briefing at division headquarters presents a sobering assessment. The division is now at less than 70% of its authorized strength. Some rifle companies have been reduced to platoon size. The 116th Regiment, which bore the brunt of the D-Day landings and has been in continuous combat since, is particularly depleted. General Gerhardt studies the situation map, where small blue flags mark American positions and red flags indicate known German strongpoints. The blue line has moved steadily closer to St. Lo, but the rate of advance has slowed with each passing day as casualties mount and German resistance stiffens. "We need to change our approach," Gerhardt tells his staff. "These frontal attacks are killing us." A new plan is developed. While the main force continues to pressure German positions directly, small infiltration teams will attempt to bypass strongpoints under cover of darkness and create disruption behind German lines. Simultaneously, increased artillery fire will target German supply routes, attempting to isolate their forward units. The day's fighting begins at 0700 hours, with a concentrated artillery barrage. More than 7,000 shells fall on German positions in a 30-minute period. When the barrage lifts, infantry and tanks move forward once more into the deadly maze of hedgerows. The battle dissolves into dozens of small unit actions, squad-sized elements fighting for single fields or farmhouses. The front line becomes increasingly fluid, with American and German units sometimes occupying adjacent hedgerows or even different sections of the same field. One particularly fierce engagement occurs at a road junction near the village of La Madeleine. Here, a reinforced German company has established a blocking position with multiple machine guns and several anti-tank guns. 3 separate American assaults are repulsed with heavy casualties before a coordinated attack with tanks, artillery, and infantry finally overwhelms the position. The fighting is often hand-to-hand in the confined spaces between hedgerows. Men use bayonets, entrenching tools, and even their bare hands when ammunition runs low or the enemy is encountered at extremely close range. Lieutenant Robert Masters of the 175th Infantry Regiment later described such an encounter in his official report. "We came face to face with them as we rounded the hedgerow. There was no time to raise rifles. My radio man smashed his radio into a German's face. I emptied my pistol point blank into another. Someone was screaming. I think it was me. The whole thing lasted maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like hours." By mid-afternoon, American forces have advanced another 600 yards along a front of about 2 miles. St. Lo is now less than a mile away, but German reinforcements continue to arrive, and the defense shows no sign of collapsing. The physical condition of the American troops deteriorates further. Many men have been without proper sleep for over a week. Rations are consumed cold when they can be delivered at all. Water is in short supply, and what is available often tastes of purification tablets and the rubber of canteens. Personal hygiene is impossible, leading to widespread skin infections and digestive ailments. The psychological toll is equally severe. Constant exposure to death and mutilation creates a numbing effect that medical officers identify as a defense mechanism. Men report feeling disconnected from reality, as though watching themselves from a distance. Some develop rituals or superstitions, carrying particular objects, repeating certain phrases, or following specific routines that they believe will keep them safe. The casualty report for July 14th shows 587 men killed, wounded, or missing. The division has now lost over 3,300 men since the offensive began, more than a quarter of its total strength. Despite the constant flow of replacements, combat effectiveness is declining as experienced soldiers are lost and unit cohesion breaks down. That night, the infiltration teams move out, small groups of volunteers who slip through gaps in the German lines. Their mission is to create confusion, disrupt communications, and if possible, eliminate command posts or artillery observers. Few of these men expect to return. The main force, meanwhile, prepares for what they hope will be the final push to Saint-Lô. July 15th, 1944. The ninth day of the battle brings a change in weather. Clear skies and rising temperatures that will reach 85 degrees by mid-afternoon. The improved visibility allows for greater air support, and throughout the morning, P-47 Thunderbolts target German positions around Saint-Lô. The infiltration teams sent behind German lines the previous night have achieved mixed results. 2 groups failed to return and are presumed lost. 3 others report successful actions, including the destruction of a German command post and the elimination of several artillery observation positions. The disruption causes temporary gaps in the German defensive line, which the main American force seeks to exploit. The day's attack begins at 08:30 hours, following another massive artillery barrage. The 115th and 175th Infantry Regiments advance toward the northeastern outskirts of Saint-Lô, while the 116th Regiment continues to clear German forces from Martinville Ridge to secure the division's right flank. Progress is initially encouraging. Several hedgerows are taken with relatively light casualties as German units, disoriented by the loss of command and control, fall back in some sectors. By 1100 hours, lead elements of the 175th Regiment have reached the outskirts of Saint-Lô, engaging German forces dug in among the ruins of the city's eastern suburbs. The urban terrain presents new challenges. The debris of destroyed buildings creates obstacles as formidable as the hedgerows. Streets are blocked by rubble, forcing attacking forces into narrow channels where German machine guns have pre-registered fields of fire. Every standing structure potentially harbors snipers or concealed machine gun nests. Lieutenant Colonel Glover Johns, commanding the 1st Battalion of the 115th Regiment, organizes his men for street fighting, a type of combat for which they have received minimal training. Small teams are formed, each with a specific role. Scouts to probe ahead, riflemen to provide covering fire, grenadiers to clear buildings with explosives, and automatic weapons teams to secure intersections. The fighting becomes incredibly intimate, often room to room within partially collapsed buildings. Men fire through holes in walls, toss grenades up staircases, and sometimes engage enemies they can hear but cannot see. The 116th Regiment, meanwhile, encounters fierce resistance on Martinville Ridge. Elements of the German 352nd Infantry Division, reinforced by Fallschirmjäger units, launch several local counterattacks throughout the day. The fighting sways back and forth across the same terrain that has been contested for days. The ground now a churned wasteland of shell holes, splintered trees, and hastily dug graves. By mid-afternoon, the situation has become critical for both sides. The Americans, exhausted and under strength, struggle to maintain momentum. The Germans, increasingly isolated by American air attacks on their supply lines, face ammunition shortages and declining morale among non-elite units. A breakthrough occurs at 15:45 hours, when a company from the 175th Regiment, supported by 3 tanks, secures a key road junction in the northeastern section of Saint-Lô. This position allows American forces to begin flanking German defenses in the city center, threatening to cut off their retreat. In response, German artillery intensifies, shelling both the advancing American forces and the city itself. A scorched earth tactic that adds to the devastation. St. Lo, once a picturesque Norman town of 11,000 inhabitants, has been reduced to a landscape of rubble, where barely a single building remains intact. The fighting continues until darkness makes further advances impossible. The day's gains have been significant, nearly 1,000 yards in some sectors, but the cost remains high. 563 casualties across the division. The 29th has now lost nearly 4,000 men since the offensive began, with rifle companies particularly devastated. That night, as soldiers consolidate their positions and prepare for the next day's assault, a strange quiet descends on parts of the battlefield. German artillery fire, which has been a constant presence for days, decreases noticeably in some sectors. Intelligence officers suggest this may indicate ammunition shortages or possibly preparations for withdrawal. The men of the 29th Division, however, remain skeptical. They have learned through bitter experience that in the hedgerow country, apparent retreats often lead to ambushes, and periods of quiet are frequently followed by savage counterattacks. Dawn will reveal whether the end of this nightmare is finally in sight. July 16, 1944. The 10th day of the battle for St. Lo begins with an unsettling quiet. German artillery fire, which has been a constant presence since the offensive began, has diminished significantly. Reconnaissance patrols report reduced activity in some sectors of the German line, suggesting a potential withdrawal or repositioning of forces. At the morning briefing, intelligence officers present their assessment. The Germans appear to be thinning their frontline positions while strengthening defenses in the city center of St. Lo. This could indicate a planned withdrawal to a tighter perimeter or preparations for a major counterattack. General Gerhardt decides to press the advantage, ordering an all-out assault to maintain pressure on the potentially reorganizing German forces. The plan calls for the 175th Regiment to push directly into St. Lo from the northeast, while the 115th Regiment swings around to approach from the north. The 116th Regiment, still securing Martinville Ridge, will continue clearing German strongpoints to protect the division's flank. The attack begins at 0700 hours without the usual artillery preparation, hoping to achieve surprise. Initially, the gamble appears successful, with lead elements of both regiments advancing several hundred yards against light resistance. By mid-morning, however, the true nature of the German strategy becomes apparent. The enemy has pulled back their forward outposts, but has concentrated their remaining strength in a series of strongpoints in and around St. Lo. As American forces advance into what appears to be abandoned territory, they find themselves exposed to fire from these well-concealed positions. The 1st Battalion of the 175th Regiment suffers particularly heavy casualties when it advances into what survivors later describe as a perfect killing zone, an open area surrounded on 3 sides by German machine gun positions. In less than 15 minutes, the battalion loses nearly a third of its remaining combat strength. The advance stalls as officers reorganize their depleted units and call for artillery support. The 110th and 111th Field Artillery Battalions respond, delivering devastating fire on identified German positions. By noon, the attack resumes, with infantry moving forward behind a rolling barrage that keeps German defenders pinned down. The fighting grows increasingly desperate as both sides recognize the battle has reached a critical phase. German troops, many now cut off from retreat or resupply, fight with the fatalism of men who expect no quarter. American soldiers, exhausted after 10 days of continuous combat, push forward on what little reserves of strength remain. In the northern sector, the 115th Regiment encounters a particularly determined group of defenders in a partially destroyed church. The stone walls, nearly 3 feet thick, resist everything short of direct artillery hits. After several frontal assaults fail with heavy casualties, a team of combat engineers works its way to the rear of the building and places demolition charges at key structural points. The resulting explosion collapses a section of the church, burying many of the defenders and forcing the survivors to surrender. By late afternoon, American forces have fought their way into the northern and eastern suburbs of St. Lo. The city, or what remains of it, lies before them. a shattered landscape of rubble mountains and cratered streets. Advance elements report that barely a single building stands intact. The destruction is so complete that navigation has become nearly impossible, with familiar landmarks obliterated and streets rendered unrecognizable. Major Norman Coda forms Task Force C, a battle group composed of elements from different units, to make the final push into the city center. The task force includes infantry from the 175th Regiment, tanks from the 747th Tank Battalion, and combat engineers to clear obstacles. As evening approaches, Task Force C pushes toward the center of St. Lo, fighting through successive German defensive positions. The combat is brutal, often hand-to-hand in the confined spaces of ruined buildings. Flamethrowers are employed to clear bunkers and cellars where German troops refuse to surrender. The day's fighting costs the 29th Division another 544 casualties, bringing the total since the offensive began to over 4,500 men. Some companies now operate with fewer than 30 effectives, commanded by sergeants or even corporals, as officer casualties have been particularly severe. As darkness falls on July 16th, American forces control approximately one-third of St. Lo, with German defenders concentrated in the southern and western sections of the city. The battle has reached its climax, and both sides know that the next 24 hours will likely determine the outcome. Throughout the night, the sound of sporadic firing echoes through the ruins as patrols clash in the darkness. The men of the 29th Division, pushed beyond normal human endurance, prepare for what they hope will be the final day of this hellish battle. July 17, 1944. Dawn reveals a landscape of utter devastation. St. Lo, once known for its medieval architecture and picturesque streets, has been transformed into an apocalyptic vision of destruction. Barely a building stands intact. The streets are rivers of rubble. The air is thick with dust and the smell of death. At division headquarters, General Gerhardt reviews the plan for what he hopes will be the final assault. The 175th Regiment, supported by elements of the 747th Tank Battalion, will push westward through the city center. The 115th Regiment will advance from the north, while the 116th, having finally secured Martinville Ridge, will apply pressure from the east. Before the attack jumps off, General Gerhardt makes a symbolic decision. The body of Captain Thomas Howie, the Major of St. Lo, as he has come to be known, will accompany the attacking force. His flag-draped remains will be the first American soldier to enter the heart of the liberated city. The assault begins at 0800 hours following a brief but intense artillery barrage. Task Force C, now commanded by General Coda personally, leads the way. The fighting is building to building, room to room, a three-dimensional chess game played with grenades, submachine guns, and bayonets. German resistance varies dramatically from sector to sector. Some positions surrender after token resistance, the defenders exhausted and demoralized after days of combat and isolation. Others, particularly those manned by Fallschirmjäger units, fight to the last man, refusing to yield even when their situation becomes hopeless. In one notorious incident, 3 German soldiers continue firing from a fortified basement even after the building above them has been completely destroyed. When they refuse repeated calls to surrender, American troops use a bulldozer to collapse the remaining structure, burying the defenders alive. By mid-afternoon, American forces control approximately 60% of St. Lo, with German defenders increasingly fragmented and isolated. Intelligence reports indicate that the German command structure has largely collapsed, with units fighting independently without coordination. At 1500 hours, a significant breakthrough occurs when tanks and infantry from Task Force C secure the St. Croix, Holy Cross, church in the Bascule district of the city. This position provides observation over much of the remaining German-held territory and allows artillery to be directed with devastating accuracy. It is here, at the Holy Cross Church, that Captain Howie's body is placed. A Signal Corps photographer captures the moment, a flag-draped fallen officer entering the city he gave his life to liberate. The image will become one of the most iconic and poignant of the Normandy campaign. As evening approaches, German resistance begins to crumble. Small groups of enemy soldiers attempt to withdraw from the city, many surrendering when intercepted by American forces. By 1900 hours, organized resistance exists only in the extreme southwestern corner of St. Lo. General Gerhardt visits forward positions as darkness falls, moving through the ruins to congratulate his exhausted men. The city is not yet completely secured, but the outcome is no longer in doubt. After 11 days of some of the most brutal fighting of the war, St. Lo is effectively in American hands. The cost has been staggering. On this final day of major combat, the 29th Division suffers another 326 casualties, bringing the total for the operation to nearly 5,000 men, almost half the division's combat strength at the start of the offensive. The German losses, while harder to quantify precisely, are estimated to be comparable or higher, with over 2,000 prisoners taken. As night falls on July 17, the surviving men of the 29th Division secure their positions among the ruins of St. Lo. For the first time in nearly 2 weeks, there is no German artillery fire to keep them awake. The sudden silence is almost as disorienting as the constant bombardment had been. Tomorrow will bring the final clearing operations and the beginning of efforts to make the shattered city usable as a transportation hub for the planned breakout operation. But for tonight, the men who have survived the Hedgerow hell and the battle for the capital of ruins can finally rest. July 18, 1944. The 12th day of the operation dawns clear and warm. The battle for St. Lo is effectively over, with only isolated pockets of German resistance remaining in the southwestern outskirts of the city. These are systematically reduced throughout the morning by elements of the 115th Regiment, while the 175th and 116th Regiments begin the process of securing and reorganizing the captured territory. The full extent of the destruction becomes apparent in daylight. St. Lo has been virtually obliterated. French civilians, emerging from cellars and improvised shelters where they have hidden for weeks, wander the ruined streets in shock. Of the city's pre-war population of 11,000, fewer than 2,000 remain, many of them injured or ill from the prolonged siege conditions. American medical personnel establish aid stations to treat civilian casualties, while engineering units begin the enormous task of clearing routes through the debris. The primary mission, opening the road network that makes St. Lo strategically valuable, takes priority, with bulldozers creating paths through mountains of rubble. Unexploded ordnance presents a constant danger. Shells, bombs, and mines are discovered throughout the city, requiring careful disposal by engineering teams. Several soldiers and civilians are killed or injured by these deadly remnants, adding to the already terrible toll of the battle. A formal ceremony is held at noon at the St. Croix Church, where Captain Howie's body had been placed the previous day. General Gerhardt and other senior officers pay tribute to the fallen officer and the thousands of other casualties sustained during the operation. French civilians, many in tears, place flowers on Howie's flag-draped remains. Meanwhile, at division headquarters, planning begins for the next phase of operations. The capture of St. Lo has achieved the primary objective of the July offensive, securing the road network needed for Operation Cobra, the major breakout from the Normandy beachhead scheduled to begin in late July. The 29th Division, however, is in no condition to participate in the upcoming operation without significant rest and reinforcement. Throughout the day, the grim work of recovery continues. Graves registration units move through the battlefield, identifying and collecting the dead for proper burial. The task is complicated by the condition of many bodies, which have lain exposed in summer heat for days. Some remains can only be identified by dog tags or personal effects. The psychological impact on the men assigned to this duty is severe. Many report nightmares and flashbacks for years afterward. One sergeant from a Graves registration unit later testified that he never again slept through the night after his experiences in the Hedgerow country. For the combat troops, the sudden cessation of fighting creates its own form of stress. Men who have lived on adrenaline and fear for nearly 2 weeks find themselves unable to relax or sleep despite their exhaustion. Medical officers report numerous cases of combat reaction, delayed psychological trauma that emerges once the immediate danger has passed. By evening, St. Lo is declared fully secured. The last German defenders have either surrendered or withdrawn. Military police establish checkpoints on all roads leading into the city, while engineers continue working through the night to clear essential routes. General Gerhardt sends a simple message to 19th Corps headquarters: St. Lo is ours. The battle has cost the 29th Division a total of 5,138 casualties over 12 days of fighting, more than 40% of its initial strength. The division's rifle companies, which bore the brunt of the Hedgerow fighting, have been particularly devastated, with some reduced to less than 25% of their authorized strength. The German forces opposing them have suffered comparable or greater losses, with the 352nd Infantry Division and elements of the 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division effectively destroyed as cohesive fighting units. Over 2,300 German prisoners have been taken, and intelligence estimates suggest German dead and wounded exceed 4,000. As the men of the 29th Division bed down among the ruins of St. Lo on the night of July 18, few can comprehend the scale of what they have accomplished or the price they have paid. They know only that they have survived when many of their comrades did not, and that the nightmare of the hedgerows is finally over. July 19 through 25, 1944. The week following the capture of St. Lo sees the 29th Division gradually withdrawn from the front lines for rest and reconstitution. The process is conducted in phases, with the 116th Regiment, the most depleted of the division's units, being the first to move to rear areas on July 19. The 2nd Infantry Division assumes responsibility for much of the 29th sector, while elements of the 35th Division take over positions within St. Lo itself. The transition is not immediate. Many of the 29th support units remain engaged in clearing operations and preparing for Operation Cobra. As the combat troops withdraw, the true state of the division becomes apparent. Physical exhaustion is universal. Many men have lost 15 to 20 pounds during the 12 days of combat. Trench foot, dysentery, and various skin conditions affect a high percentage of the troops. More concerning to medical officers is the psychological state of the survivors. Captain Milton Grossman, a division psychiatrist, notes in his report, "The men exhibit symptoms consistent with extreme combat fatigue. Most startling is the emotional numbing, an absence of normal responses even to significant stimuli. Many report feeling as though they are observing themselves from a distance, or that the world around them is somehow unreal. These are protective mechanisms that allowed survival in combat conditions, but may present significant challenges during reintegration. While the infantry units rotate to rest areas, engineering battalions continue the critical work of clearing roads and bridges. The strategic importance of St. Lo lies in its road network, with 5 major routes converging in the city. These must be made usable quickly to support Operation Cobra, the breakout offensive scheduled to begin on July 25th. The devastation of St. Lo presents enormous challenges. American forces had dropped over 60,000 tons of bombs and artillery shells on the city and its approaches during the battle. The result is a landscape almost lunar in its desolation. French civilians returning to the city often cannot locate where their homes once stood. Samuel Beckett, the Irish writer who would later achieve fame as a playwright, visits St. Lo during this period as part of a Red Cross delegation. His report, titled "The Capital of Ruins," captures the apocalyptic scene. St. Lo was bombed out of existence in one night. German prisoners of war and casual laborers attracted by the relative food plenty, but soon discouraged by housing difficulties, continue, 2 years after the liberation, to clear away the debris, literally by hand. For the men of the 29th Division, the week after the battle brings a gradual return to normal military routine. Hot meals replace cold rations. Showers and clean uniforms become available. Mail is delivered, connecting men to the outside world many had begun to forget existed. Replacements arrive in large numbers, beginning the process of rebuilding the shattered rifle companies. The division's after-action reports, compiled during this period, provide a clinical assessment of the Hedgerow fighting. They note tactical lessons learned, the importance of combined arms operations, the effectiveness of the Rhino tank modifications, the need for better training in small unit actions, and the critical role of artillery in breaking German defenses. What these reports cannot capture is the human experience of the battle, the terror of moving through fog-shrouded hedgerows, not knowing if the next step would trigger a mine or machine gun, the claustrophobia of being pinned down in drainage ditches for hours under artillery fire, the horror of seeing friends literally torn apart by explosions, the guilt of survivors who wonder why they lived when others died. On July 25, Operation Cobra begins with a massive bombing campaign against German positions south of St. Lo. The 29th Division, still rebuilding, does not participate in the initial breakout, but will rejoin the advance in early August. For now, the division rests, reforms, and remembers. The Battle of the Hedgerows and the capture of St. Lo will be recognized as one of the most significant and costly operations of the Normandy campaign. The 29th Infantry Division's performance, maintaining offensive momentum despite staggering casualties and incredibly difficult terrain, will become a case study in military determination and sacrifice. For the individual soldiers who survived, however, the hedgerows of Normandy will remain a landscape of nightmares, a place where youth and innocence died alongside thousands of their comrades in the green hell of the Bocage. August 2024. The Norman countryside is peaceful now. The hedgerows remain, though many have been reduced or modified to accommodate modern farming equipment. Apple orchards still dot the landscape, producing the cider and calvados for which the region is famous. In summer, tourists flock to the D-Day beaches and the American Cemetery at Colleville-sur-Mer, where 9,388 U.S. soldiers are buried. St. Lo has been rebuilt, though few buildings predate 1944. On the outskirts of town stands a simple monument to the men of the 29th Infantry Division, who fought and died to liberate the city. Local residents still refer to the 29th as the Blue and Gray Division, and speak with reverence of the sacrifice made by American soldiers. The most poignant memorial, however, is to Captain Thomas Howie, the Major of St. Lo. A plaque marks the spot at St. Croix Church, where his flag-draped body was placed on that July day in 1944. The inscription, in French and English, reads simply, "Dead on the Field of Honor." Few of the veterans who fought in the Hedgerow battles remain alive today. Those who do are in their late 90s or beyond. Their numbers dwindle with each passing year, and soon the Battle of the Hedgerows will pass from living memory into history. What should not be forgotten is the scale of the sacrifice made by the 29th Infantry Division and other American units in Normandy. The 29th suffered over 5,000 casualties during the St. Lo offensive alone, more than 1,000 men killed, wounded, or missing each day at the height of the battle. The division would go on to fight across France, Belgium, and into Germany, adding further chapters to its distinguished combat record. But for many veterans, the hedgerows of Normandy remained the defining experience of the war, a hellish landscape where the division came of age through blood and sacrifice. Military historians continue to study the Battle of the Hedgerows for its tactical innovations, particularly the adaptation of combined arms techniques to overcome the challenging terrain. The Rhino tank modifications, the coordination of infantry, armor, and artillery, and the development of air-ground cooperation all represented significant advances in American military capability. Yet beyond the tactical lessons, the battle stands as a testament to human endurance and determination. The men of the 29th Division, many of them draftees with minimal training, led by equally inexperienced officers, confronted some of Germany's most elite troops in terrain that heavily favored the defenders. Despite suffering catastrophic casualties, they continued to advance day after day until their objective was secured. In doing so, they helped break the stalemate in Normandy and open the way for Operation Cobra, which would ultimately lead to the liberation of France and the defeat of Nazi Germany. The cost was terrible, but the achievement was undeniable. The peaceful hedgerows of today give little indication of the horror they once witnessed. Farmers till the soil where men once killed each other by the thousands. Children play in fields that were once carpeted with bodies. Life continues, as it must. But beneath the surface, the echoes of that terrible summer remain. Unexploded ordnance is still occasionally uncovered by plows. Dog tags and personal effects sometimes emerge after heavy rains. And in the memories of the few remaining veterans, the hedgerows are forever a place of darkness and death. A green hell where youth and innocence were sacrificed in the cause of freedom. This is the legacy of the Battle of the Hedgerows, not just a military victory achieved at terrible cost, but a reminder of both the horror of war and the courage of those who endure it. The men of the 29th Infantry Division, who bled and died in the bocage of Normandy, deserve to be remembered not just as soldiers who accomplished their mission, but as human beings who faced the worst that war could offer and somehow found the strength to continue. Their story, documented in official reports, preserved in letters and diaries, recorded in interviews and memoirs, stands as one of the most compelling narratives of World War II. It is a horror story, written not in fiction but in fact, not in imagination but in blood and sacrifice. Let us never forget. Thank you for listening. If you are also proud of the bravery of our soldiers, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new historical stories.